And it was one of those things, normally when I compose, I don't have a sort of a sense of, this is exactly what I'm going to do right now. It's more of a, I like to experiment, and then eventually something stands up from the rest. And that's sort of what happened with the piece. I produced a whole chunk of stuff, and then I just sort of took parts that I liked, and it started to sound kind of like a clock. And then that reminded me of just sort of how in life we seem to be accelerating, technology's accelerating, everything's going a million miles per second, and sort of life is kind of a mystery box in that way. And that made me think of the Greek myth of Pandora's box, where you don't know what you're opening up or what you're actually getting yourself into. And it sometimes feels like we're on this continuum from which we can't pull ourselves. We're just inexorably headed toward wherever we're going. So I thought that was sort of a cool thing to then base the rest of the piece on as it evolved.
When you compose, because you're also a violist, do you noodle on the viola to find ideas, or are you at the keyboard, or what's that initial thought process like?
I actually don't noodle on the viola, surprisingly. I really stick to the keyboard. I love just experimenting with intervals and finding things, but I don't actually take the viola. I do that for some of my Sons of Granville work, or with some of my abstract experimental scores for horror films. That's where I'll just, and in those cases there is no notation. It's just, multi-track a series of scary sounds in the viola and just let that be the recording. But this process has been a lot more with the notation and just writing the notes separate from experimenting with playing.
So in the process, like in the journey, from being commissioned back last year by the Postmodern Camerata to this year being in rehearsals and actually hearing the piece being lifted from the page and into the air by the instrumentalists and the singers, what has been for you maybe one of the more challenging moments in that journey?
Well, precisely that, just going from what you hear in your head to suddenly how it sounds on the stage. And there'll always be discrepancies, especially when you're kind of new to the whole composing shtick. So it was a sort of a reality check, but it was a seriously fun. It is a continuously fun process of how you envision things will sound versus how they really do sound. And I think it's just the best way to grow as a composer, because at the end of the day, you really do need to actually hear your stuff played by an orchestra. You can't just live on the paper and in your head. At some point, it's got to get played. And when that does finally happen, you can learn so much about how your experimenting has either paid off or it hasn't, or it's produced results that you didn't predict. So it's been a really fascinating process. So.
Musical influences, can you speak a little bit about?
Yeah, film music has been a huge thing for me. My first impression of music was through films, particularly the Lucas and Williams and Spielberg films, and others, like Stanley Kubrick as well. But I just remember really loving the space battles and all of the cues. I always loved the big sweeping themes that everybody can hum in the shower, but there was something about the exciting cues in between, like the sword fights and the space battles and all that exciting music. I really loved that, and I always wanted to kind of find a way of bringing that excitement to the stage. And of course, there have been a lot of people who've written really exciting, fast-paced, intricate music. But the thing that I guess I strive for is also having a lot of fun in the music. The music should just be super fun. So yeah.